Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't been here before, my name is Naya and I am based in Myanmar, and I finally arrived back to Myanmar about 2 weeks ago. So I finished my quarantine and I'm out and free. Not really, I'm just free in my own home. But today I really wanted to sit down with you guys and have a really great chat in detail about how to actually get back to Myanmar. So in my last two videos, I kind of showed you guys quarantine and then also like my flight journey back. But I really wanted to focus on like the details and technically like each step you need to take to get back, because I know there are so many people who have been trying to get back to Myanmar either as locals or as foreigners. And the whole process is very confusing and very hard. Because I am an expat, my experience is definitely going to be more focused towards foreigners getting back. So if you are here and a foreigner, I hope I can really help you out. So today is October the 20th. So advice I'm giving you is based on the current standings of October 2020 in Myanmar. That might change depending on when you're trying to get back. Before we begin, if you haven't seen my flight journey back to Myanmar and what quarantine is like, check out this video, or might be on this side, maybe this side. And also it'll be linked below, so there's two different videos that I really think would be really helpful for you guys, so make sure you check them out. All right, so let's start. So I've made so many notes about this because I just want to make sure I cover everything for you guys. So for most of you who've been following me, you know that I went back to Australia in March when COVID first broke out, because I thought that it was going to be really bad in Myanmar. So I went to Australia and then I spent 6 months in Australia. Spent about 5 months of that trying to get back to Myanmar. It was a very lengthy process and it took a lot of time. So if anyone is looking to get back, what I would tell you is patience and persistence is like the key things that you need to have when you're making this whole application to get back. So at the moment, I think with Myanmar, they're only allowing 200 foreigners in per month. So that makes it a lot harder for us. It did used to be like 250, but they've reduced it down, I think, due to the current outbreak in Myanmar. On that as well, because there is a current outbreak in Myanmar, I do think that there has been a lot less like flights coming in, like relief flights. They've probably limited it down a bit more because they're trying to limit the amount of people coming into the country. So just keep that in mind, that things have changed because of the new outbreak in Myanmar. And also because people are working from home, I think the process is just generally like getting approved for visas, getting the mode for approval is just going to be a lot slower. All right, so let's begin with how you even begin to get back to Myanmar. So the first thing you need to do is figure out, do you have a visa that's valid or do you not have a visa that's valid? If you have a visa that's valid, it makes your life a lot easier because you do get to skip like a huge step and maybe just skip straight to like getting on a flight part. But pretty much my visa unfortunately expired like 2 months after I got back to Australia, which meant that I needed to apply for a brand new visa. I don't know why I didn't apply for a renewal. There was a reason. I think it was just like maybe because my visa had already expired, it was too late to do the renewal because you have to be in the country, like you have to renew it before it expires. So I had to apply for a new visa, which is even harder to get because they are very reluctant to give out new visas. And when I say they, I mean the government and the ministries. So because I had to get a new visa, I needed to figure out the process in which to get that visa. So when I first applied in Australia, I reached out to the Myanmar embassy in Canberra. So they had told me that I could just apply like normal and send them my documents and they would apply to MOFA for me. But a month later, things changed and they were like, oh, the process has changed, which is how it is now, where you need to apply to DICA or you apply to a ministry that oversees your sector, and they need to make a visa recommendation letter for you. So that's step 2. So once you've established like if you need a visa, if you don't need a visa, you first need to do is to reach out to your Myanmar embassy in your country. Unfortunately, the information that they and the procedures that each of them follow is kind of different. So Australia was really different to Southeast Asian Myanmar embassies because I think that they had a few less processes to follow because they had Southeast Asian countries like Malaysia and Singapore, etc. They all have a few more relief flights going through, so they have a lot more flexibility. Whereas with Australia, they only had one relief flight that they were having maybe like once a month, so it was a bit harder, and the processes, like the procedures were a lot more stringent, I would say. So once I reached out to the Myanmar embassy and I found out the process, which was to apply to DICA, or the at the time it was the sector that oversaw like the industry or the company that I was in. My company, so your company, will need to reach out to the DICA or the MOC, like the Ministry of Construction or the MOEE, and ask them to make a visa recommendation for you to come back, based on them writing a letter, the company, of all the reasons why you need to come back, on like why you're an essential worker. So we had to get the company to write out all the reasons, like why I'm an essential worker, my current situation, like all my details, passport, that I needed a new visa. And then so the MOC, so the Ministry of Construction in our situation, was the one to go and process that visa recommendation letter. That took about 2 to 3 weeks, because it needed to be like approved by the ministry in Yangon and then go get approved by Naypyidaw, and then for Naypyidaw it had to be like couriered up there, and it just took a while, and just government bodies, bureaucracy takes ages. So it took about 2 to 3 weeks to get the visa recommendation letter, which is just a letter from the MOC saying, advising the Central COVID Committee and MOFA of why they should give me the visa approval. But from what I know and from my experience, I think the visa recommendation letter is like the most important thing. So if you get the visa recommendation letter, you're probably a little bit more of a shoo-in to get approved by the Central COVID Committee and the MOFA. So the MOFA is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So step 3 is getting your Central COVID Committee approval. So once DICA or the MOC or whichever ministry it is has given you your visa recommendation letter, they will then send that letter of recommendation to the Central COVID Committee. And the Central COVID Committee is, from what I know, it's the body in like Naypyidaw that's approving whether or not you're okay to come through. So I think maybe they'll look at the country you're coming from and they'll give the approval. So once they gave the approval, which was the fastest, it was probably like within a week, they're supposed to send that to MOFA. So they might send that to MOFA, or they might send it to the MOIC, which I think is the Ministry of International Cooperation, which also oversees like MOFA. They kind of work hand in hand, but it could go to either of them. So you need to be very like on the ball with following up which of those it'll go to. It should go to MOFA, but it could go to the other one, because it just depends on who they CC in the email. So for this whole process, like from when you get it from DICA or MOC up into the COVID Committee, up into MOFA, you need to be following up through your company, with somebody on the ground in Myanmar, with what's happening. It's the best way to do it, because if you're trying to do it, like when I tried to do it from Australia, obviously it was impossible because I didn't have the numbers, I didn't speak the language. So if you have someone from the company following up for you and like calling through every day, you're gonna get a lot more movement than not calling at all. The step 4 is getting the MOFA approval. This was a little bit tricky for me, and it took me about like way longer. It took me like 3 to almost 4 weeks to get this through, because this should actually be a lot more seamless, because the Central COVID Committee sends your visa recommendation letter that they've approved to MOFA, and MOFA, from what I know and can gauge, they're not like the decision maker. I think as long as they've already got the visa recommendation letter approved by the COVID Committee and you send them that, it's just an instruction and it's a directive for them to just issue you the visa. However, this is where it got tricky, is my letter for the visa recommendation letter, it didn't specifically say that MOFA needed to take it to the embassy and advise the embassy to issue out the visa. So because it was that missing technicality, MOFA just sat on my visa approval letter and they didn't want to approve it. Like, they didn't do anything with it until we called, and we found out why after like a week and a half, why they hadn't done anything. And then we had to try and figure out a way to get them to approve it. We ended up being able to speak to somebody at MOFA and tell them, like, this has all been approved. Like, MOC, who gave you the visa recommendation letter, said that they're not going to issue another letter saying for you to issue it to the embassy, so you should just do it. So after back and forth for a while, we finally got that approved. So that's where I thought, that was it, we'd hit it. I got the visa and I could do what I wanted. No. Step 5 is that you get the visa, the MOFA approval, and then you have to get on a flight. So I think getting the visa it took the longest time, but then finding the flights took the most, manpower. It was just exhausting, because for Australia, they wouldn't issue me the visa unless I had a flight. and I think in Southeast Asia, if you get issued the visa, you can have the visa and then you can find a flight to get on and like coordinate with the embassies. But for Australia, they were like super strict, and they were like, okay, if we get you on a flight, then we'll give you the visa. But the flights, I had to send them like certain flight paths or potential flight paths that I wanted to get on, and one of them was that I wanted to fly from Australia to Korea to Yangon, because there's a lot of relief flights going from Korea. But to get on a Korea to Yangon flight, the Myanmar embassy in Australia had to be the one to ask the Myanmar embassy in Korea if I could get on that flight. And I think that's got to do with the amount of foreigners that they can let into the country, so they have to make sure that, like, I guess everyone's being covered and there's not just some random person turning up that hasn't been approved and like documented to the Myanmar government. So finding those flights was really hard, and my biggest issue was that like transit times, or like transit, like being able to actually transit in an airport, is that just finding out if you can transit pretty much. So for Korea, I could only transit for 24 hours, but then the flight from like Australia to Korea was 72 hours in advance, so I couldn't transit, there wasn't enough time. And then I thought about flying to Dubai, which gave me more time to transit, but then like getting on a Dubai to Yangon relief flight was really hard because the Myanmar embassy in Canberra didn't want to put me onto that relief flight. So it was just like, and unless they requested it for me, the Dubai embassy was not going to put me on the flight. So it was so tricky to deal with, and I was really lucky in the end because the Myanmar embassy in Canberra, because I had like, literally called them every day and I was on the top of their list, they put me as a business person on the last relief flight that came in, which was in October, and that was the first flight that they had business people on, and I was one of like 15 people that were foreigners that got on that flight. So I was super lucky, but honestly I think it was just also like hard work paying off, because being so persistent talking to them and making sure that I was at the top of their list to put me on their list. So finding a flight was very hard, and in terms of finding a flight, you need to do all the hard work, and maybe your company can help you, but you need to be finding out from Facebook groups or finding out from like WhatsApp chat groups, just like listening to people's experiences that had posted on Facebook. Also some like ministries or some chambers had put the flight details on, and then following the airlines on Facebook. Like you had to use all your resources to kind of follow when the flights were going to be, and like if they were actually flying. So even when I was thinking about flying to Dubai, there were lots of Emirates flights that I had to call up Emirates and check, like, are you actually flying? Is this actually scheduled? We had to call like MAI, which is Myanmar Airlines International, and ask, is your Korean flight flying? Because on the website it says they are flights, and then they wouldn't be flights. So you need to do a lot of calling around and a lot of due diligence before you can find out whether or not that flight is actually going. But the good news is that once there is a flight, and once your embassy actually approves you for that flight route, it gets a lot easier. So once I had been approved for the flight and they had given me the details, my next steps were to make the payment. So I made the payment to Myanmar National Airlines, and you need to follow up with them as well to get them to send you your e-ticket, because the Myanmar embassy doesn't do that part. Like they just give you the payment details. So once you've gotten those details, then you need to also prepare your COVID test and your 7-day quarantine, like documentation approval form that you've actually completed it, and any other transit forms that you need. So the COVID test, I was very stressed about for ages, because I had seen on the internet like 36 hours before you arrive in Myanmar. Some people were saying it was 48 hours before, or some people were saying it was only 48 hours before you like board the flight. And then I read another lady's post where she said it was 72 hours, and another lady had said that she had hers was like over 100 hours because she had flown for more than 100 hours to get back. So I was very confused as to what time frame I needed to have the COVID test done, and I asked the embassy and they were like, oh, as long as it's as close to the boarding date as possible. And I was like, well, that doesn't help. So I ended up just deciding that it would be 72 hours, because from reading other people's posts and experiences, they seem to have been able to get in. So I got my COVID test done 72 hours before my boarding time, because I had to also transit from Melbourne to Sydney, and then my flight from Sydney to Yangon was on that Saturday at 9 a.m. So I got it done on Wednesday at 9 a.m. And it was also like it's so hard to get a COVID test brought back to you the same day. It's just almost impossible, especially in like quite large countries. So mine was done in 24 hours, which was great, and that was the fastest I was going to get it done. So in terms of COVID tests, I wouldn't worry too much about the time frame, because even when we arrived in Myanmar, they didn't seem to really look at the time frame. They were just looking at whether or not you were negative or not, and I was negative, so it was okay. And then with the 7-day home quarantine, that's quite easy. It's probably the easiest document. You just stay at home for 7 days, and you get maybe your doctor or somebody like your work, or I had my body corporate for where I live, give me approval that I had, and just sign it and stamp it. They just want to sign and stamp to make sure that you've stayed home. And then make sure you take all those documents with you, your flight booking details, and then you'll be set and you'll be fine. I mean, the flight itself, if you want to see that experience, once again, it's linked below or it's up here. That was an okay experience. But overall, getting back to Myanmar, as I said, it just takes so much patience and persistence. I wish you the best of luck if you're trying to get back, because it is a little bit tricky and it does take a lot of time. So if you don't need to live in Myanmar, don't leave Myanmar. The whole process is really stressful, and it just takes so much persistence. My biggest advice would just be call your embassy all the time, like your Myanmar embassy all the time, to find out what's happening, because things change all the time and they won't take the initiative to call you and update you, and also ask the right questions. Like there was so many times that I would just have like a quick call with them, but sometimes I would ask something new the next day, and then they would come out with new information. So I would say, make sure you are always asking them all these random questions. Like don't ever assume that they're going to tell you, that they would tell you if they needed to. Also, in terms of when your company's following up with the government bodies in Myanmar, make sure that they follow up quite consistently, and try and get one person to speak to in that ministry that will give you the right information. So just keep trying to talk to that same person as opposed to speaking to different people. And lastly, be prepared. Be prepared to do anything it takes to get back to Myanmar. But once you're back, it's really worth it, apart from the fact that it's been raining a lot. I just missed the rainy season. At least I'm copying some of it now. But yeah, I think all in all, I hope this helps you, and that it was detailed enough. If you still have more questions, please feel free to message me on Instagram or comment below, and I'll help you as much as I can. And if there's certain information or like details you want more of, let me know, and I can definitely fill you in more. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video and it helped you, and next week I'll be back with some content in Yangon, so I look forward to it. But thanks for watching, and don't forget to comment and like. Bye.